Welcome to Appalachian Bonsai. Today I'm going to give you a couple of tips about collecting that I've been asked frequently over the last 3 years of doing this channel, and I'm going to be throwing a lot of information out, so just bear with me and we'll get through this together. The best time of year to collect trees is going to be in the springtime or maybe late autumn. Springtime's a great opportunity to collect trees. One, it's cool so you can sit there and work, but two, the trees are still in dormancy but just starting to wake up, and that's a really opportune time to collect these trees. The nutrition that's been stored in the roots is being filled into the trunk and into the leaves and starting to push those buds out. And once that happens, the trunk is filled with energy, with nutrition, with sap. When you cut the roots, whenever you cut the top, you are basically creating like a battery of stored energy. And that stored energy will help sustain the tree until it produces new roots and new leaves. So that's the best time to collect for me. With other trees, you can collect in the fall time, the autumn time. That would be a late fall, again, because the tree is going into dormancy. So it's not in a growing process, it's more of a slowing down process. You can cut the roots, cut the top, the tree will store its energies, put them into a polytunnel with some good moisture until the springtime, whenever it will waken up. But for me personally, I collect in the spring. Bad thing about collecting in the summertime or in the wintertime, I would hope would be obvious, but to let you know, the wintertime, the tree's not growing, so it may not have an opportunity to callus over, to quarantine off those cut areas during a time when it's supposed to be asleep. So it's trying to expend energy when it shouldn't be expending energy. It needs that energy to survive for the wintertime. In the summertime, like what we're entering right now, it's really hot, so you have a lot of sunshine, which means dehydration. You have a lot of growth, which means the foliage is out and it's vibrant, but that foliage also means that it's expiring moisture. So that's the reason why we're having to feed so much water into these things during the summertime. It's not a good time to collect. You have a really high chance of killing a tree if you're collecting it in the summertime. If you want to have an understanding of when I'm collecting, just look at the bottom of the video at the very beginning when I do the little splash screen. It should say spring, or it should say February, March, sometimes even April. It should give you a good indication of what time of year it is that I am doing a certain task. You'll see this in the Arthur Jura video coming up. That was taking place in March. It's going to make a big difference about the timing of your own pruning, clipping, collecting, growing processes. Very important for plants. When you're collecting, know what you're collecting. Are you collecting a hornbeam? Are you collecting a maple? Are you collecting a juniper or a pine? Those will give you a quick indication of what you should do for aftercare. Most deciduous trees that I deal with will definitely have a similar reaction when it comes to collecting. All right, they will callus over and they will push out new leaves in about 4 to 6 weeks as long as the conditions are right. And generally they're correct if you're collecting at the correct time, as mentioned earlier. One of the things that you need to be aware of is that you can, in many cases, remove most, or if not all, of the soil of a deciduous tree here in the eastern United States. These are not small root balls, all right? These are not found in tiny cracks. Most of the deciduous trees you've seen me collect are in fields or in very loose, coarse soil. That's different whenever you're in a sustained small crack like a mountain pine. The mountain pines need that small ball of soil. Those junipers really require that small ball of soil to sustain themselves because that's the way they've lived for 100+ years. And if you suddenly extract all of that old soil, you're going to cause them to go into shock. They're going to put out juvenile foliage, they're going to suffer, they're going to die. There's a lot of things that can go wrong. So it's important for you to understand what you're collecting, where you're collecting, and then of course some of the things about the tree when you're collecting. When you're collecting a tree, if it's got a lot of good roots on the outside, you could probably go ahead and cut that and take it with you. Before you dig, give it a wiggle and a shake. That will help you determine if that tree is solidly in the ground with a big fat taproot. If you have a big fat taproot, it's probably a good idea to just leave it alone, or if you can, leave the younger roots on the sides out, and if you can get that taproot and cut it from underneath, leaving those other roots, then I would do that, leave it for at least a year, come back, check on it, then you can collect it. Again, make sure it's the correct season. People always ask me about the soil. Soil mix is in the description below. But for right now, I'll tell you I use Turface MVP, which is a type of soil amendment used on baseball diamonds. That's what it's created for. It's an expanded clay, fired clay. It doesn't break down very easily. It retains pretty good moisture. It makes a very good coarse aggregate. The second part is pine bark. I use pine bark soil conditioner, which I purchase at any large store or nursery. It's chunky, and so I have to sift it all out. All of these need to be sifted between 2 and 6 millimeters, or about a 1/16 to a 1/4 of an inch in diameter. I use diatomaceous earth. Surprisingly, it does get down to mush after a couple of seasons, but it retains really good moisture. My trees love it, especially for that first year. So with my new collections, it drains well, holds good moisture, roots just fill that bucket up. Lastly, I use coarse sand. You can use play sand from the store as long as you sift it out. Mason sand works as well because it's generally very coarse going into your mortar mixes. I use 3 parts Turface to 3 parts pine bark to 2 parts diatomaceous earth to 1/2 to 1 of sand. So again, that's 3 parts Turface, 3 parts pine bark, 2 parts diatomaceous earth, 1 part, sometimes even 1/2 of coarse sand. Sift it all between 2 and 6 millimeters, or 1/16 to 1/4 of an inch. That's it. It requires you to pay attention to your watering schedule, which means more water, but it's really hard to overwater. It just does a good job. I really like it. My trees do really well with it, and I know other people who use a similar style coarse mixture. Works well. Give that a shot. What is a bonsai? This right here is a saguaro cypress. Really gorgeous tree I've had for 7 years or so. This is closer to a bonsai than any other tree that I have at the moment. It does have a lot of wires, guy wires. It has some really beautiful limbs. I think it's going to be a really great tree. This is really close to being a proper bonsai, which brings me to my last step. Bonsai is not the trees that I'm digging out of the ground. Those are just pieces of plant material. They're stumps, right? Even whenever they start putting out the leaves and they start to take on a little bit of shape, it's still not bonsai. It might be considered pre-bonsai. It's not bonsai until it's reached a really strong, finished shape of tree. All right, this is the essence of a tree. I think you can imagine walking under this, climbing into the branches, letting the birds fly through. Thank you, John Naka. This beautiful dogwood right here, which we've collected, not a bonsai. If you notice in all of my collection videos, I say collecting for bonsai, not collecting a bonsai, because this is not a bonsai. This is just a piece of plant material that is on its way to becoming a bonsai. I might consider this pre-bonsai because it still has some ways to go, but it has a little bit more of a refinement than something that's just been cut and collected out of the ground. Anyway, I hope that this video has been helpful in some of the questions that you've asked me. I hope it answers plenty of those. I'm sure you're going to have many more, so make sure you leave them in the comments below. Find me on Instagram. If you're not following on Instagram, you're missing out on a lot of information coming from Appalachian Bonsai, lots of pictures, lots of videos, a couple of Rockies that he's just making a mess of everything. So anyway, like and subscribe because there's more to come. Thanks for watching. Early spring is the jam. Primo.